They said the hills kept their own secrets, that the fog that rolled over the holler every morning wasn't weather at all. It was memory, hiding what the land refused to forget. In 1953, a midwife in rural West Virginia was called out before dawn. No roads, no phone, just a knock on her door and a face she didn't recognize. The man said only one thing: "She's having the baby. You can't tell nobody." Before we go deeper into this dark story, make sure to subscribe to American Shadow, the place where real American crime stories come to life. Hit the like button if you're hooked and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think about this case. By the time the midwife reached the cabin, the sun hadn't yet broken the ridge. The air smelled like iron and rot. Inside, a young woman lay on a bed of quilts, barely conscious. She couldn't have been more than 16. Her belly was swollen, but her body looked starved. No husband, no father, no name offered, just whispers from the shadows. The kind of silence that means everyone knows, but no one will ever say. When the child came, there was no cry, just a wet gasp, and then stillness. The midwife wrapped the infant, and for a moment she thought she saw something wrong, not monstrous, but off. The baby's eyes wouldn't focus. Its hands trembled, fingers too short, nails already discolored. The mother wouldn't look. She kept murmuring over and over, "He said it was okay. He said God made us pure." By sunrise, the man who brought the midwife was gone. The cabin was empty except for blood, silence, and the sound of flies waking up. The midwife never told the sheriff. She went home, burned her apron, and drank herself numb, but stories like that don't stay buried forever. Decades later, when the county's archives were digitized, a volunteer scanning old birth ledgers found a page torn out, a single E. Entry missing between April and May of 1953, and beside it, in faint pencil, someone had written just one word: hollow. That word would lead genealogists, journalists, and even FBI consultants down a path that none of them would forget, because what they uncovered wasn't just a family secret. It was the living proof of what happens when isolation, religion, and madness breed behind closed doors for generations. The story of the child born in that cabin isn't just rumor. It's documented, verified, and hidden in plain sight. They started with the census records, the simplest place to look for ghosts, the Hollow, they called it, a strip of unpaved land deep in Boone County, ringed by sycamores and shale, where the same 5 surnames repeated for over 100 years. The population never rose above 70, outsiders never moved in, nobody left. The genealogists mapped it out, line by line, name by name, until it began to look less like a family tree and more like a knot. Brothers marrying sisters, cousins becoming husbands, children whose fathers were also their uncles, or worse. The paper trail wasn't clear, but the photographs were. Yellowed portraits, stiff faces, eyes too close together, ears tilted, mouths frozen mid-grimace. The kind of faces you see once and never forget, not because of deformity, but because of something deeper, a wrongness you can't name, but feel. One photograph stood out. A girl, barefoot in front of a sagging porch, her dress hanging off one shoulder. She was thin, beautiful in the way wild things are, but her stare carried the dull calm of someone raised without choice. The back of the photo had her name, Mary Alice Wetmore, the same initials that matched the torn birth ledger. Researchers tracked her through county records, a birth certificate, 2 missing years, and then a death notice in 1953. No cause listed. The paper trail ends there. But in a drawer at the state archives, they found something else. A police note, never filed. The handwriting was shaky, scrawled across a cigarette-burned form. Received anonymous tip. Young girl, pregnant, father unknown. Locals say, don't go up there. And then there was a map. Hand-drawn, folded between the pages. It led to the ridge above the hollow, to an abandoned coal shaft marked Closed 1921. It was there, investigators later said, that they found what remained of the Wetmore family, a cluster of great with no markers, just stones. One of them smaller than the rest, with a rusted spoon driven into the soil as a makeshift cross. That's when they realized. The child that was born in that cabin wasn't the first. It was simply the one that lived long enough to be noticed. When they exhumed the graves, the bones told what the people never would. There were deformities in the skulls, symmetrical, repeating, collapsed nasal bridges, shortened jawlines, spines curved inward like hooks. DNA analysis decades later confirmed what the whispers already knew. Nearly all of them were related, and not by accident. The Wetmore line had folded in on itself for generations, cut off by terrain, mistrust of outsiders, and a kind of faith that turned inward until it became its own god. They had their own scripture, handwritten in coal dust and Bible ink, mixing Old Testament wrath with something darker, something older. The belief that purity meant blood untainted by the outside world. Neighbors claimed the Wetmores weren't dangerous, just off. They'd come down from the hills once a month for supplies, bartering hand-carved trinkets, rarely speaking. The store clerk remembered the older man, thin, grey, quiet, who always referred to his wife as sister. Folks laughed it off. In places like that, truth and madness wear the same face. But the real horror wasn't in the graves or the legends. It was in the living memory that lingered long after. A retired sheriff, interviewed in the 1980s, said he once followed up on a complaint about screams echoing through the hollow at night. When he arrived, he found nothing but candlelight flickering through a boarded window and a voice inside repeating scripture over and over, "Blood of my blood, flesh of my flesh." He never went back. When forensic teams later reconstructed the infant's DNA from the bone fragments, the results made even hardened investigators fall silent. The father and the mother shared nearly identical genetic markers, more than siblings should. The child, they said, had less genetic variation than a cloned sheep. It shouldn't have survived at all. But it did. For a time. Long on, or to leave signs, a birth record, a death note, and something else found years later, sealed in a mason jar beneath the cabin's floorboards. Inside was a single lock of hair, still blonde, still human. Alongside it, a note written in a trembling hand. "He is ours. No one else must know." That was the last trace of the Wetmore line, or so everyone thought. In 1991, a family from Charleston bought the land cheap, sight unseen, 50 acres of forest, a dried creek bed, and the ruins of what locals just called the Wetmore place. They planned to build a hunting cabin. On the first night, the father said he heard what sounded like crying from somewhere in the trees. His wife brushed it off as wind, but by morning their dog was gone. They found it 2 days later, whimpering, half-starved, refusing to go near the old foundation stones. While clearing brush, the eldest son unearthed something that stopped him cold. A buried metal box. Inside were photos, faded Polaroids from the 1970s. The images were wrong. Children with matching faces, standing in a circle. A man's shadow in the background, tall and skeletal. On the back of one photo, in the same shaky hand as before, was scrawled, "We kept him safe." The family left within a week, abandoning their down payment. The property sat empty again, reclaimed by vines and silence. But the story didn't. A local journalist picked it up, thinking it would make for rural folklore. A ghost story to fill Sunday pages. Instead, she found herself unraveling the same names, the same bloodlines. Census forms, school records, medical notes. Each time she traced one back far enough, it ended the same way. A dead child, a sealed record, or a disappearance. When she interviewed surviving locals, their tone changed. Some laughed nervously, others turned cold. One old woman finally said, "You can't breed sin out, you can only bury it." She claimed she'd seen the child once, or what was left of him, wandering the creek bed in the late 60s, pale as milk, eyes milky and blind. "Didn't make a sound," she said, "but he looked right at me." The journalist's final article never ran. Her editor killed it, citing ethics, but the draft leaked years later, Pages scanned, passed around online. It described evidence of a living descendant, someone who'd left the hollow in the early 2000s under a different name. No record of parents, no photographs, just a DNA sample entered into a national database that triggered an alert. 99% genetic similarity to the Wetmore infant of 1953. Somebody survived. They traced that DNA match to a small town in Kentucky just across the Tug Fork River, a place called Lenore. Population under 2,000. A young man in his late 20s had submitted his DNA to an Ancestry service, curious about his roots. He was looking for a father he never knew. What he found instead was a chain of results that terrified the lab technicians. His genome wasn't just similar to itself, it repeated, like a photocopy of a photocopy. The company reached out quietly. When he didn't respond, they contacted local authorities who found him living alone in a weathered trailer at the edge of an abandoned strip mine. His neighbors said he was polite, soft-spoken, worked odd jobs, never caused trouble, but they all noticed the same thing. He never went out during the day, and he talked to himself in two voices. When agents interviewed him, they described a sense of unease that went beyond words. He answered questions before they were asked. He seemed to know things he shouldn't. One officer reported feeling physically ill after just a few minutes in his presence. Dizzy, nauseous, a metallic taste in his mouth. They collected a blood sample. The results confirmed it. He was a direct descendant of the Wetmore line, and more than that, likely the child of the 1953 infant. But that would be impossible, wouldn't it? Unless the stories were true. That the infant had lived, hidden in the hollow, raised by the remnants of the family until the others died off, then wandered out one winter when the snow was thick enough to cover its tracks. A child who grew into a man with no past, carrying generations of rot inside his blood. When the authorities returned to question him again, the trailer was empty. No signs of struggle. Just a hole in the ground behind the trailer, recently filled, and inside, beneath a layer of clay, a jar identical to the one found. And under the old Wetmore cabin, same handwriting, same words. He is ours, no one else must know. The case went cold, but in the years that followed, strange reports began surfacing across 3 states. Families waking to find their livestock mutilated, homes broken into, strange symbols carved into doors. Each time, the witnesses described the same thing, a pale man with milky eyes, whispering scripture in a voice that didn't sound human. And every report listed the same phrase in the police notes, no fingerprints found. The FBI sealed the file in 2009 under anthropological anomaly, a phrase that doesn't appear in any other American record. But the story didn't stop there. You can still find fragments, local news clippings, missing persons bulletins, half-erased web archives, all orbiting the same quiet horror. A hunter in Mingo County claimed he found footprints in the mud, bare, small, almost childlike, yet sunk deep as if the person weighed twice as much as normal. A highway worker outside Williamson said he saw a pale figure at dawn, standing perfectly still in the median, eyes shining like glass marbles. When he turned his truck around, it was gone. By then, the locals had stopped calling it a man. They called it the Blood Saint. Some said it was the last Wetmore, cursed to wander. Others believed it was something else, something that had become too pure, too inbred, stripped of everything human, until only instinct remained. A creature that moved by memory, guided by generations of whispered scripture. When investigators reopened the file in 2017, a DNA sample was found smeared across a window pane at one of the break-ins. It matched the Wetmore profile exactly, but there was a difference this time. The genome had changed. Certain mutations that should have been lethal were gone, stabilized, adapted. It was as if the bloodline had learned to fix itself, evolve. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you hide it, burn it, or claim it as proof that something older than morality lives inside the human frame? Historians still argue about whether the Wetmore story should even be told. Some call it rural mythology, others proof of genetic isolation gone wrong. But there's one fact no one can explain. Every time the records resurface, every time a journalist, a genealogist, or a YouTuber mentions the name, someone reports strange noises near the hollow. Last year, hikers camping near the old ridge swore they heard crying from the trees at night. One recorded it, a high, broken wail that turned into words, 3 of them. "He is ours." The same phrase found in every jar, the same handwriting traced across 70 years. And if you play the recording backward, locals claim you can hear something else buried in the sound, a second voice, deeper, almost pleading. "Let me out." They never found the source of that recording. The hikers deleted it a week later, claiming their phones began turning on by themselves, replaying the sound at 3:17 a.m. every night. They moved out of state soon after, but for those who've spent years tracing the Wetmore bloodline, the past doesn't let go that easily. Once you open that door, it remembers your name. The archives are quiet now. The property where the cabin once stood has been overgrown for decades, reclaimed by moss and silence. But every few years, someone wanders out there, historians, true crime enthusiasts, ghost hunters, and the stories repeat. The silence, the smell of iron, the sense that something is watching from the tree line. One man said he found a bone in the creek bed, small enough to be a child's, bleached smooth by time. He left it there. There's a theory among geneticists, whispered, never printed, that the Wetmore bloodline represents a closed loop, a biological echo. When a gene pool folds inward far enough, it begins to feed on itself, creating not just deformity, but memory. The DNA starts carrying more than physical traits. It carries fear, hunger, guilt. The body becomes the vessel for the sins of everyone who came before. That would mean the child born in 1953 wasn't just inbred. It was the culmination of something older, a lineage that devoured its own history until only instinct remained. The hunger to continue, no matter the cost. When the midwife died in 1974, her daughter found a final note among her papers, just a single line. "I saw his eyes open." Some believe he's still out there, not human anymore, not animal either, just a living memory, carried forward through whatever blood still bears his name. Maybe he walks among us, silent and unknowing, drawn back to the hollow when the air gets cold and the fog rolls down the mountain. And maybe that's why the locals still refuse to build there, even after all these years. Because sometimes blood doesn't die, it just waits. And if you ever find yourself driving through Boone County, past the rusted sign that says Old Hollow Road, do yourself one favor. Keep your windows rolled up. Don't stop. Don't look back. Because some families never die. They just remember.